Let's go! Nick Saban is back at it again. I want you to hear this full quote on parity.
Well, I think all leagues want to create parity. If you look at the NFL, they would love for everybody to be 8-8 going into the 17th game of the season because every fan base and every city would be excited about what's the outcome of the next game. So parity creates a lot of excitement. I think it's harder to do in college football because we have so many different teams and the fundamentals are different at the University of Alabama as opposed to another school. And I don't want to mention another school, but a 1AA school, a Division II school, even a lower half, Division I school. The money's different, the dynamics are different, the investment that's made in the athletes and the program are different, and the value created for the athletes is different. So it's not all the same. So if we were going to create parity, we would have to take, okay, this is a group of 60 teams or however many, I don't know what the number is, and these are the 4 or 5 leagues that we're going to have, and we may consolidate them, and we're going to try to create parity in a more refined group.
Sure.
I don't think that's the only way, that's probably the only way that you could accomplish that. But in the NFL, if you lose, you draft early. If you win, you draft late. You play a harder schedule if you win. You play an easier schedule if you lose. So, all those things rules are for parity.
Yeah.
So that there's interest. So our fan base, they want to dominate. So my job is to try to create a program here where we have the best chance to succeed and have success relative to the competition. But I think even in the SEC, when you add Texas and Oklahoma, there's going to be more parity because there's probably going to be 6, 7 teams ranked in the top 20
Sure.
that are going to be playing each other. So, but the problem with the way the whole system is, there's no accounting for that.
Right.
So all we do is take the teams that win the most games at the end of the year and put them in the playoffs. But do you really get the best teams? When they told me that we would be favored against 3 out of the 4 teams that got in the playoffs, I'm like, well, why aren't we in the playoffs?
Sure.
Does that mean they have a better team? Or does it mean that those people don't know what they're talking about? I really don't know that. But, and I'm not being critical of anybody, but if you're going to have parity, you have to have a better way of figuring out who has the best teams. Not just because you lose 2 games on the last play of the game, that knocks you out when you may be better than somebody else who didn't have the same circumstances that they had to play in.
We'll get to the last part of that quote where Nick was just absolutely positively wrong. But the first part, I'll have to admit he was correct, right? Parity in college football is very difficult to achieve, right? It's just not a sport that will ever truly be equal. College football, you play fewer games, so there's less variance. You're able to stockpile talent. It's a sport just naturally, if you just have the better players and better depth, you're just going to win. Where college basketball, college baseball, you occasionally get Oral Roberts, as the case with baseball this year in Omaha. You'll get some true Cinderellas and some teams that are able to win and lose at a higher clip from year to year than in other sports. Now, in college baseball and basketball, there are still the dominant teams, but still, it is a little bit more equitable. College football, it's just never really going to be like that. And like you said, in the NFL, the worst teams get the best schedules the next year, and they get the best draft picks the next year. And that in and of itself is a very flawed concept. It does make things more equal for those professional leagues, but at the same time, you're also rewarding losing. In college football, the one thing I really do like about it is you honestly don't reward losing ever. So I love that, and I actually agree with Nick quite a bit in that first part of his quote. But, he just kind of rambled, right? That was a long response. The most important thing you need to do is not beat teams, okay? Let me actually replay this clip for you yet again. I want you to listen very closely.
Even in the SEC, when you add Texas and Oklahoma, there's going to be more parity because there's probably going to be 6, 7 teams ranked in the top 20 that are going to be playing each other. So, but the problem with the way the whole system is, there's no accounting for that.
So to put together what Nick said, simply put, the biggest thing for the modern college football playoff system for you to succeed is to avoid losing. The biggest myth is in college football, they care about who you beat. That is totally wrong. It is all about how many losses can you avoid, okay? And that has just always been the case in college football. Whenever you hear college football playoff discussion at the end of the year, I want you to notice how different it is in college basketball and college football. College basketball, a big question that's always asked is who did this team beat this year? Whereas in college football, it always starts with how many losses do you have. It is a very unique thing to the sport. So Nick is pointing out, hey, let's have a system that more accounts for your strength of schedule. Because, as many of you know, Alabama almost lost to Texas last year. It was a very, very close game. I think a lot of you would agree that Texas might have deserved the result with all the misfortune that they had with the injuries to their quarterbacks. So, yeah, I get what he is saying there as well, that the SEC with 2 more traditional powers joining, we have to account for how much more difficult the SEC is actually going to be. What I would say, though, in retort to that is I do think that's part of the reason why Nick kind of changed his tune from the 9 to 8 game schedule, because he knows the current playoff system is always going to penalize you more for a loss than giving you credit for a major win. It always is the case in this sport. Now, this is where I truly cannot stand what he said just then about the college football favorites thing. And look, that road game versus LSU, I was in the building. It was absolutely insane. And yes, it is a difficult place to play, and a lot of out-of-conference teams don't have to deal with the night game atmosphere in Death Valley, but you still lost the game.
So when they told me that we would be favored against 3 out of the 4 teams that got in the playoffs, I'm like, well, why aren't we in the playoffs?
Sure.
Does that mean they have a better team, or does it mean that those people don't know what they're talking about? I really don't know that, but and I'm not being critical of anybody, but if you're going to have parity, you have to have a better way of figuring out who has the best teams, not just because you lose 2 games on the last play of the game.
Yeah.
That knocks you out.
So this is where I think if I was an Alabama fan, I wouldn't necessarily say I'm concerned, but that is not vintage Nick Saban at freaking all. Because the old Nick would not have been doing all this complaining this offseason about all the different rules, and old Nick would just say the following: we did not do enough on our own to get into the college football playoff. If you beat LSU, guess what? You are in the college football playoff. Or if you beat Tennessee, you are probably getting into the college football playoff. Now, maybe you would have had to have beaten Georgia in the championship game and get in as a one-loss team. But honestly, I'm not here for hypotheticals. The truth is, you lost those games, okay? And I understand with Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC, it is going to make things tougher. But old Nick Saban would have said we could have done more to execute on our own to get into the playoff just on us alone, right? I guarantee it, the powers that be would love anything, and I mean absolutely anything, for Alabama to be in the gosh darn college football playoff every year, because they are the biggest draw in the entire sport. So this idea that the playoff committee did not want Alabama in is absolutely insane. They would have much rather the two-loss Alabama over an undefeated TCU to get in, but TCU took care of business, right? Yes, that was the Big 12 versus the SEC, but if you're Alabama, if you just lose one less game, you are truly in the playoff discussion, even if you play Georgia in the SEC championship game and you lose. So it's on you, Nick. It is on you. Quite literally, it is on you, because you decided in that game to inexplicably go for two earlier in that game versus LSU, when all you needed to do was go for one, and you would have had the game-winning field goal to win the game there at the end. There's so many different things. And, you know, I understand I'm trying to turn the page. I'm tired of talking about last year Alabama and all the whining about them not getting into the playoff. You lost two games. And I don't care if they happened on the last play of the game or if you were blown out. You lost two games. And old Nick wouldn't be still complaining about that. The next thing is the games have to count. They do, because, look, the Vegas favored argument is one that I never quite understand, because Alabama, because they have so much raw talent and because the public loves betting Alabama and swallowing the points, guess what? Vegas is going to favor Alabama over every non-Georgia team from here until the end of time, until Alabama, until the wheels just completely fall off for the Alabama college football program, and that's not happening, I don't think, anytime soon. So this idea that Vegas is the ones that absolutely positively have to, say whether or not you get in or not, that's just crazy talk. Just because Vegas has you favored doesn't mean jack squat. The Eagles were favored in the Super Bowl over Pat Mahomes. Didn't mean jack squat. So I'm sorry, this is just sour Nick Saban. I actually, listening to that last clip with Joel Klatt over and over and over again, I started being like, yeah, you know what, I agree quite a bit with Nick, but just not being able to move past last year is just absolutely asinine. And Nick has always been, lauded for changing his offense and being forward thinking. But with, the NIL stuff and, the complaints about that last summer to now, it just seems a little too much old man yelling at clouds. So let me know what you think down below. Fun video today. I love it when the GOAT comes out and shares a few thoughts. It's always good for the sport. And let me know what you think. Now, floating in your face in just a second, I thought this video from Nick was pretty funny. It is Power Hour SEC. Boom! And tonight, we are doing salmon. Let's go.